Welcome everyone to CABA's quarterly CHC webinar meeting. My name is Marta Klopotowska and I am the Manager of Programs and Communications at CABA. I'll be emceeing the slides today, and I just want to mention to everyone on the call today that this meeting is being recorded, and as I mentioned previously, we will be circulating the link to the recording for those who are attending today and for those who registered. And with that, I'll go ahead and I'll pass it on to Greg to go over the agenda for today.
Thanks, Marta. I'm Greg from CABA. So here we're at with the agenda. We'll do a brief call to order, a welcome and introductions, and a little bit about the CHC from our CHC chair, Ken Wacks. Go over a little bit of administrative work where we're approving some past minutes. So feel free to put up your hand and make a motion and second those. And we'll also be doing a call for vice chairs and call for new keynote presentations during that administrative section. Go do a brief update on some of the work from the CHC and our landmark research project from 2022, and then go over some of our new podcast series with Marta. We'll be reviewing some of the CHC podcasts, and then we'll have a keynote presentation from Jonathan Robinson from Frost and Sullivan on residential energy storage. And go over some new business and announcements of some upcoming events, and then eventual adjournment. With that, I'll pass it off to Ken, our chair, to go over a little bit of welcome and call to order and to launch the meeting. Thanks, Ken.
Greg, thank you very much. I'm Ken Wacks. I appreciate the opportunity to host this meeting and call it to order. I run a management consultancy practice that was formed almost 40 years ago, specializing in home and building systems and energy management. The Connected Home Council is one of the two major undertakings of CABA with the Intelligent Buildings Council and the Connected Home Council. The CHC, or Connected Home Council, was established in 2004. The CHC initiates and reviews projects that relate to the connected home and multiple dwelling unit technologies and applications. The council also examines industry opportunities that can accelerate the adoption of new technologies, consumer electronics and broadband services within the burgeoning connected home market. CHC webinars and selected research topics explore industry shaping trends and forces. CHC also explores the use of technology to make connected homes more flexible, adaptable, and human-centric. To start the formalities of the meeting, I'd like to hear a motion to approve the minutes from the February 21st meeting.
David Katzel moves.
Thank you, David. Is there anyone who would like to second the motion?
Chris Larry seconds.
Thank you, Marta. Did you get the name?
I sure did. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you very much to both of you. Are there any opposed? Give a 10-second pause. Hearing none opposed, the motion is passed. The minutes are approved. We are currently seeking vice chairs for the Connected Home Council. If there's any interest, let us know. You can contact me. You can get my contact data at kenwacks.com, my company website. That's KENWACKS.com, or contact Marta or contact Greg at CABA. And we will tell you about the roles and responsibilities of the vice chair. They're not very heavy. You'll get all the honor of being listed as a vice chair. We also are looking for keynote speaker for the November Connected Home Council webinar. If anyone is interested or knows someone who might be interested in putting together a 20 to 30-minute keynote for the next Connected Home Council meeting, please let us know. We'll have CABA contact you for further discussion. At this point, I'll turn to Greg for an update on CABA's research.
Yeah, and I should note that the vice chair opportunity, there's not all the heavy lifting is really done by Marta, and there's not a whole lot of work to do other than if there's any strategic decisions, you'd get involved in those at the executive level of the council, or and then presenting certain sections at the each one of the quarterly council meetings. But if you're interested, definitely send a note to myself, Marta, or Ken, or even just type it into the chat box, and we'll follow up. Thanks. So for this, I'll just give a brief overview where we started this research project in 2022 on smart home energy management, and we've had various steering committee meetings, and we've done a survey out to the industry and did some in-depth interviews. And we're looking to complete this project soon. And this project has been made possible by the funders that you see on the screen that chipped in $5,000 or $10,000 to make the research possible. And it looks at smart home energy management market, adoption perspectives, and different trends in the industry, inhibitors to growth, and some of the key opportunities that exist in that space. And this was done through a competitive RFP process, and Harbor Research won the bid to conduct this research project. We also have an RFP out for research firms to bid on right now. And we'll be getting those bids coming back in on the 15th, on Monday, and we'll be reviewing those next week. So we'll have a better idea of what the exact topic and get some of the initial funders on board. So we'll reach out to some of our members to see if there's some interest in joining one of these collaborative research projects where we essentially crowdfund research in the space. With that, I'll go to the next slide. And Marta, if you want to say a few words about the podcast the program that you're running.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Yeah. So, this is, we're going on about a year now with these podcasts. We started, I would say, midsummer last year. Essentially, episodes that are approximately half hour long on intelligent buildings, connected homes, and what was meant to be quarterly and to be released on Spotify and Apple has now become more of a monthly release, and sometimes now we're looking at even bi-monthly, just because of all the interest and support that we're receiving. And so for that, I just want to thank all of our members and non-members who been contributing to these episodes and volunteering their time to be guests and hosts. So I should say that our last recording, which was released on May 1st, was titled Part 3 of Post-Pandemic Building Issues, Cybersecurity and Intelligent Amenities. The subtopic would be more focused on the cybersecurity issue for this episode. And this was hosted by James Carlini of Carlini and Associates and guest Isaiah Jones of Applied Integrated Technologies, or AIT. And this was actually the final installment of the multi-part series. We're always looking for guests and hosts. So if this is something of interest to anyone on the call, or really anyone that you may know who may be interested in something like this, please let us know. My information is on the screen there, or you can just contact us or message us on the comment box here. Just let us know if there is some interest. We can have a quick meeting to discuss exactly what's involved. And really, you could be a guest or host, really depending on which side of the conversation you're looking to be. Yeah, and I think with that, I will pass it on to Greg to introduce our keynote for today.
Thanks, Marta. I'm filling in for Charles, who couldn't make it today. So this presentation, keynote presentation, will be on residential battery energy storage, and I'll leave the description up to Jonathan. But Jonathan Robinson is a global power and energy research director at Frost & Sullivan, who's we worked with on various projects in the past. Frost & Sullivan, that is. He's an experienced research and consulting professional, and has extensive knowledge and topics related to energy and the industrial sectors. He has 15 years of experience in delivering strategic consulting and market insights to global OEMs, solution providers, utilities, private equity firms, government agencies, enterprise agencies, and SMEs. His specialty or areas of focus are conventional and renewable power, microgrid and decentralized energy, hydrogen economy, and energy storage. With that, I'll pass it off to Jonathan to briefly go over the presentation and for the next sort of 30 minutes or so, and then there'll be an opportunity to do a Q&A at the end if you have any questions. We'll feel free to answer those at the end. So, Jonathan, over to you. Thanks.
Super. Thank you very much. Good to be speaking with you all. I'll get control from Marta, if that's okay.
Of course, yes.
Hopefully it will all work smoothly and I can move it forward. Yeah, so today we're talking about residential battery storage. So this is an area that we've tracked for some time now at Frost & Sullivan. It is certainly a growing area of interest for our clients, and I think there's obviously a few key factors that are really pushing this market forward as well. I'm going to come to talk about those a bit more, but obviously with higher energy costs and with the growth of decentralized solar PV, this is really making this a more viable commercial market. So when we first looked at this, sort of nearly a decade ago, you were talking very, very low volumes, but we are now starting to see some real, last few years, we've really seen some growth in this market. And I'll be giving you an idea on the numbers of the market and how it's evolved later on. Frost & Sullivan, for those of you that don't know, is a research and advisory firm. So we offer syndicated research to our clients, and we also carry out a number of advisory engagements for different clients, from everything to small scale projects to large scale activities. So it's homes and buildings is one of the key sectors that we're active in. Residential battery energy storage falls between the power and energy space, which I work in, and my colleague Melvin Leong, who manages our buildings practice. So we do collaborate a little bit together on this topic, and it's certainly something that we're very interested and passionate about. So moving on to the presentation, I'm actually going to talk at a higher level about battery storage before I get into the residential part, because there's a few sort of trends that I can comment on that will be relevant also then for the residential space. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about wider electrification. I'm going to talk a little bit about material sourcing. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the investment that we're seeing in new capacity. And I'm going to give some numbers on the residential solar market, which I've already trailed, is obviously a big part of the growth of this sector. And after that, I'm going to talk globally about the market. So I'm going to give so I know we have members not just in North America, but I know there are people that will listen to this in other regions. So I will be talking a little bit on the global picture, but the end bit is going to be focused on North America in particular. So we will go to North America then, being that's where the majority of the members are. So this first slide, the main purpose of this one is, and I usually use this a little bit, just to kind of show that that battery energy storage and stationary storage is a small piece of the global market. So obviously we have the electrification of transport, and you can see here the sort of different splits between different types of transport, consumer electronics, and stationary storage. So while we are significant in our own markets, obviously it is the electrification of transport that also has a big impact on stationary storage. And the reason why I highlight this is the cost savings and the development of that industry also feeds in to the stationary storage space. So be it second life batteries or use of recycled materials. You know, a lot of these trends are not just in the stationary space, but they're also impacting from what's happening in the electric vehicle, electric transportation space as well. So there's going to be huge growth in electric transportation over the course of this decade. My colleagues in the mobility team at Frost & Sullivan are actively engaged in tracking this market. Here I'm giving you, and I'm not going to go too much into this because this is not meant to be an automotive presentation. So these are some forecasts from colleagues about the growth in new trucks and cars. The main purpose, though, of this slightly busy slide is to actually highlight that we do have excess capacity at the moment of lithium, which is one of the key materials that we use in battery energy storage. So you may hear a lot about how there is, and there are for certain industries and certain sectors, we have got constraints on material supply, but actually for lithium, there are decent reserves around the world. There is going to need to be a lot of investment in exploiting those reserves, but there is lithium available to meet the demand that's there. So it's not in some of the materials that we talk about within Frost & Sullivan, where there are severe constraints, and there may be in one or two geographies, there are lithium reserves available. Now, these are located in a few key countries, one of which is China, which does present a challenge for the global supply chain, given some of the political factors that I'm sure most people on this call are aware of. But there are very good lithium reserves in Chile, in Argentina, in Australia, also Bolivia. So from a North American point of view, certainly relationships with Latin America, South America, and those countries is going to be very important. And certainly European countries are also leaning into some of those markets for future sourcing. So the stability and viability of those countries and their economies is quite important, but the reserves are there, and therefore the expectation is that we will be able to meet global demand. We will also see recycling becoming more of a factor as we go forward. So as powertrains, electric cars are retired, not much of it now, but as in the future they are scrapped, we will be able to extract the material and reuse it. And there's a lot of work going on around the reuse of materials in that space. Oh, sorry, I've gone one too far. And the next one is lithium-ion battery manufacturing capacity. There is huge investment in this globally. There are a number of gigafactories. It's becoming almost a common thing in the coming years. A number of gigafactories currently under construction. A lot of countries have realized that they want to try and build their own domestic production for electric vehicles. Now, a couple of things with this chart. This shows 2020 to 25, and one thing you'll notice is the dominance of China, which is certainly a potentially concerning aspect, depending on your viewpoints, that we would be so dependent on China for this. I would say that the US picture will improve post 2025 because of the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act. So electrification of transport is I think is going to have the most impact. The Inflation Reduction Act will be on the electrification of transport in terms of dollar investment. So there is the expectation, and we're already seeing it, of a lot of manufacturers looking at building facilities in the US. So although the US is falling behind a little bit in 2025, roll on a few more years and we expect the picture to be significantly improved as well. The EU has already been pushing more aggressively on this. Germany in particular, very worried for its own automotive manufacturers about being dependent on China. So there's been a push there, but certainly more will need to be done to increase the capacity because of that huge demand I showed you earlier on. The last one before I get fully into the batteries is to turn to residential solar PV. So we've got some numbers here about the number of residential solar systems that we're going to see in different countries. I've selected most of these are the largest markets globally. So the United States is currently the largest market for residential solar PV systems, but relatively Australia, as a much smaller population country, is significantly higher and is getting probably closed in on the US since the 2020 numbers. And Germany is another very significant market. And you can also see by 2030 that there is a significant increase in growth across all markets. So we are seeing strong growth in residential solar PV. High energy costs have been a big driver. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has really got things going in Europe in terms of people wanting to, obviously because the costs are higher, but the energy independence has become a little bit more significant in Europe. And so we've seen, we're expecting to see very, very strong growth on the residential side. And on the right-hand side, the chart gives you an idea of what this will mean in terms of total amount of households. So in the Netherlands and Belgium, particularly dramatically, over half of households will therefore have a residential, a decentralized energy system. So that's going to have a big impact on those countries in terms of the rest of the people who are still on the wider electricity network, because more than half the people are going to be largely to a degree grid independent, particularly if they have battery energy storage systems. You can see for the United States, along with the UK, it's a much, much lower percentage. So most people are still going to have access to grid electricity, but there will be certain states, obviously, where that percentage is higher. So if you're thinking Florida, you're thinking Arizona, you're thinking Hawaii, you're thinking California, you know, the traditional sunshine states, that percentage is going to be above 7%. Equally, there will be, you know, states where you know, regulated states where the price of electricity is relatively low, where there'll be relatively little business case for residential solar PV. So the price of electricity by state is obviously a really big impact on whether people want to have PV and whether they want to have battery energy storage. Right, on to residential battery energy storage significantly. As I said, the price of electricity is a key element in all of this. So open energy markets with high electricity prices tend to be prime markets. Also markets that have any kind of incentives and subsidies. Talking first about Europe, Germany, dominant country, will as I had already mentioned, you'd seen in the PV side, Germany has very high electricity prices. So it's been a key market for overall demand. Italy has high electricity prices, so we'll see more activity there as another example. We also will see a situation where the incentives for selling back to the grid are not going to be as generous as they have been in the past. So we will now see a situation where it will become more viable and attractive to store the electricity and consume it yourself later rather than sell it back to the grid. And in the early days, sort of in the 2000s, you know, into the 2010s, people got very generous contracts for selling it back to the grid. So you didn't even think about using it at all yourself. You remain grid connected, you earn good revenues selling it back. That situation is changing, and that will encourage storage. In Asia, Japan and Australia have long been lead markets. So Japan had incentives, quite generous incentives for storage in the 2010s, and that really boosted demand there. And Australia, very, very sunny climate, ideal conditions for solar PV, high electricity prices, has always been a prime market for battery energy storage. Within Asia, China will be a key hub for future growth. China has not traditionally incentivized domestic solar PV generation, but there are some changes there. Commercial industrial has now become a bit more attractive, and obviously if China were to make these incentives more generous or really set targets on residential solar PV, I mean, that would, or battery energy storage, that would dramatically change the market. I mean, to give you context, China is usually in the region of half of all global additions for solar PV overall on its own. So equally, whereas for residential, it's a much smaller amount. So you know, a regulatory shift in China, a policy shift there, could have a big impact. Africa and the Middle East, we generally see relatively low volumes. We do see some pockets of Africa, South Africa, where things pick up a bit. A business case in needing to have your own energy because the energy systems are not reliable. But generally, you don't get still get storage really much growth in Africa. Middle East has got a very good electricity system for the Gulf states, so they are generally okay. Other states maybe can't afford it, but there is some potential growth in the Gulf, even with those electricity grids, for relatively small amounts. Latin America is a relatively immature market compared with a lot of the others, so the sales volumes are still quite low. Residential solar PV incentives have never really been particularly strong there. And the final one, which I'll talk about more anyway, is North America. And here, as we'll see, grid resiliency has often been a key issue. California, very much a key market for a few years. Bit of a question mark now for 2023. Because some of those incentives are becoming a bit less attractive for California, but at the same time, energy costs are very high. But we'll dive into North America in a moment. Just to show some regional numbers, so this is our forecast for system installations. So you'll see that in 2020, you had about 500,000 being installed. By 2025, we'll be, I'm just drawing my line across, I think we'll certainly cross the million mark. And by 2030, we will be talking about getting close to 3 million being installed globally each year, with Europe, so again, Germany, but also a number of countries in Europe, Poland, the Benelux countries being significant. North America will see mainly, obviously, the US. Asia will still be a lot of activity in Japan and Australia, but we also see potential from South Korea, China, as I mentioned. The other markets a bit smaller, but it's pretty big growth. Right, global market shares. So a few of these company names, I'm sure very well known to people. I'm sure most people have heard of Tesla. I wonder if probably most people have heard of Panasonic. I think most people have heard of Huawei. Maybe a few less people have heard of some of the others, you know, LG Chem, BYD. Not sure everybody will have heard of Sonnen. Certainly, Sonnen is actually a German company owned by Shell that performs quite well in Europe. But as you can see, there's a few key players leading the market. Tesla has been very active in this space, obviously, for a long time. It's a link with the electric cars. LG Chem of Korea is also a very long established player. BYD is a battery big automotive manufacturer, also getting involved in the battery space. Very big company from China that's gaining a lot of brand awareness. And Huawei is one of the other ones I would kind of call out is starting to get more active in this space from really not having been there a few years ago, but mainly looking at the Asian market with its own systems. So quite a diverse range of companies in this space, but you'll see it gets more consolidated when we come to talk about the North American market in a couple of slides' time. Okay. Matter of fact, we're here straight away. So not wanting to ignore Canada, we do have forecasts for the United States and Canada. Must say Canada is not predicted to be a particularly high growth market. So there'll not be much more about Canada being talked about in the presentation. We will be focusing on the United States. Obviously, solar PV is not necessarily an ideal technology in Canada, partly due to, in some cases, the daylight hours in winter. But actually, the reality is more that Canada obviously has already a very strong penetration of renewable energy. So Canada's energy mix has obviously got significant amounts of hydropower in there, and that also does make sort of residential solar PV not always able to compete as strongly. So the investment climate is not there as strongly in Canada as things stand. That may change. Whereas the United States, there are certain states, I mentioned obviously California, but there are other states I'd also mentioned before, where the business case is much, much stronger. And as you can see for the US, we've seen pretty strong growth in the past few years. So our forecast for 2023 is that the market will be, will have increased by about 80% on 2020 numbers. And we're forecasting continuous growth over 500,000 installed by 2030. And that could accelerate further. The full impact of the Inflation Reduction Act is yet to really fully be understood. It's just obviously coming into force at the start of this year. It could well drive things further. So this was, this forecast was with the early stages of the Inflation Reduction Act in mind. But as we see the market develop with that, we could easily see things change and get more aggressive in the future. Now, this comes from a survey that we did for a client a couple of years back. So it's slightly dated. I think it was done in 2021, but I would imagine that a lot of this will still hold true. So I wanted to share a few things with this on some different aspects of battery energy storage. So the first one is, what makes battery energy storage attractive for a potential buyer? So we asked this question. We surveyed, I think from memory, about 2,500 people for this. And what was interesting, we're getting different options, as you can see here. In some of the questions that we did, it would be optional, but generally we provided people with options to pick. That was the way the survey was structured. What was interesting, I think, with this, incentives understandably coming in, payback understandably coming fairly high. Clearly, education is still needed because people really didn't necessarily understand the benefits that can come from battery energy storage. So there was obviously some lack of maybe understanding and appreciation, and it does highlight that it's not a it's not massively well-known consumer technology. Those of us that have researched it and engaged obviously know it, but it's not something that everybody understands. So these were the things anyway that would need to be improved on for people to make for battery energy storage to become more attractive to them. Now, the key perceived benefits, again, interesting. Savings on electricity bill, you would definitely expect to see that usually top. I mean, the reason for doing it is certainly to save some money. Energy independence is much higher in the United States than it is in European countries. But energy independence is a big theme, particularly given obviously some of the big weather events that the United States has had in the past few years as well. I suspect energy independence, if anything, has kind of grown stronger. So this belief that people are not tied to the grid, that they will have their own, storage of power in some calamitous situation is something that's particularly strong there. Ability to charge electric devices. I mean, you can easily charge a laptop at any time, but obviously the electric vehicle will also become something that can tie in, although electric vehicle is also a battery energy storage solution. And there is certainly the potential that you could argue that if your electric vehicle is parked up there and plugged in, there are increasingly propositions to use that electric vehicle as a battery storage technology and for the grid to earn revenues on that. But what we generally hear from a lot of people is those people that have a battery energy storage solution also have an EV. So it's about creating the ecosystem for people to be fully electrified. And the last one, what deters a purchase? Now, this was some interesting aspects here. Device too expensive, you would obviously expect that to come up fairly strongly. Payback time too long for me. Interesting that people picked that, probably because I wouldn't suspect they don't have a great understanding of what the payback period would be, but clearly there is a belief that the payback period would be too long. Very interesting that maintenance costs picked for too high, because there's actually very little maintenance needed on a battery energy storage system. And again, that leans back into this sort of conclusion that actually the education still needs to be increased in this industry. So there are still people out there that sort of think that this is going to be something that's very, very demanding, when in fact it's not going to be something that's going to require much maintenance at all. You know, the other ones further down, house reconstruction, afraid of damage. I mean, this is something that could be fitted outside the property. It can go into a basement, but it's a relatively easy thing to install. You're very unlikely to have any damage, and also fire hazard. And this probably relates to, obviously, people have seen the stories that come through about them catching fire. Lithium-ion is not without some risk, but it's very, very rare for that to happen as well. So there's obviously certainly a degree of education, and that's one of the things that came through this survey for our client, is you will need to look at how how you can reach lots of things that we talked about. There are lots of different things that we talked about in the work that we did for them, but clearly an education aspect is something that will need to come through. I can see we got a question which I'm actually going to take now. It's battery energy storage risk is very low. It would be at a similar level to a risk of home electronics or an electric vehicle. There is nothing that means it will be any higher. So I suppose what I'm saying is, if you're prepared to have a mobile phone, and certainly if you're prepared to have an electric vehicle, if you're prepared to have these devices, then I don't believe that the cases of lithium-ion having any major problems are not more significant for that. And certainly the investment and focus is on minimizing any sort of danger as well. So if anything, the technology will get safer rather than more dangerous. So key players in the residential solar plus storage value chain. So number of logos within here. So what you're looking at here, we've got the PV kit component suppliers, because increasingly you will see solar sold with storage. So you'll see them both being fitted together. So that's why we've shown that in here. So you've got the module suppliers, you've got the inverter suppliers, which are the two big things that obviously go into a residential PV system. Then you've got some of the key players in the battery storage space, which we mentioned. So people like Tesla, Sonnen, particularly big, obviously, in North America. Then you've got the people who are basically doing the installation. So the distributors and the financiers are basically the companies that are actively engaged in fitting residential solar PV systems. Solar City, which is owned by Tesla, is the biggest, but you've got people like Sunrun, Vivint, Sungevity. There's a few players in this space, but you've got them sort of dominating. And then what you have got is the installers, and the installers is often very localized. So these big companies do have sometimes their own presence, but in reality, in a lot of cases, it is still someone locally who will have the contract to come out and do this. And certainly, as the market grows, there is more installers coming into this. There's a lot of competition actually for those skilled people who can do this versus other projects that they can do. But we are certainly seeing that if anything, it's fragmenting more with more people getting involved rather than greater consolidation. That's how we're seeing it at the moment. And then in terms of the market shares, so I said this would look very different from the global picture. So Tesla massive in the United States versus its global position. So Tesla's really big in the United States. It does really well in Australia, is much smaller in other parts of the world. But in North America, United States, Tesla is by far the number one. And then you've got LG Chem, who I mentioned earlier, of Korea, who are very much involved in larger battery energy storage, so commercial, industrial and grid, but they do play in the residential space as well. And then SunVerge, who I'd mentioned, Sonnen I've mentioned before as well. Generac, interesting. So Generac are probably the largest provider of generator sets in North America, particularly gas. They do very good business out of gas in the residential space as a backup power source. They also have a storage business that they acquired as well. And Enphase is an inverter manufacturer that's also been active in the battery energy storage space. So a much more consolidated picture than what you would see globally. And this shows some of the key partnerships. So this is my final slide. I think I've run slightly over, but hopefully you've got some knowledge and information out of this. You can see the primary suppliers across the top. So I mentioned SolarCity, Sunrun, and you can see here who they have relationships with in terms of the module providers. You can see that there are a couple of big inverter players. I mentioned Enphase, but also SolarEdge. And you can see that Tesla obviously works with SolarCity as its parent company, parent-daughter relationship there. And the others often have multiple providers. So they usually have contracts with a couple of different players. So you can see LG Chem is supplying to a few different manufacturers. Sonnen's got a couple there. Generac mainly with Sungevity. But we expect these players to be really leading the residential solar space, and the players that they're getting the batteries from will also be quite dominant there. There are some new players looking to come in on the battery energy storage space, but there are these key players that are certainly doing a lot in the US. Okay, thank you for that. I'll take any questions now. I'm, I say, very aware. I think I've run slightly over, but any other questions coming in?
I have one.
Yeah. Okay.
If you could just state your name and your organization at the
Sure. This is
Thanks.
Michael Carrick from Carrick Engineering Associates in Vermont. And
Hello.
My question is, a lot of these systems seem to be aimed at whole households, relatively large, support for an electrical system. What about a market that is aimed at a very, very small, very less expensive type of application where you're simply trying to maybe charge an electric car, like a 1 kW PV hooked up to a battery storage unit that basically, sucks power and puts it into that battery constantly. So if it takes a long time, who cares? And then you come and plug in your car and gets all charged up, and it just keeps going on. It seems like something like that at a very small modular kind of capacity model would seem to have a market. What's your thoughts on that?
Not something that seems to have gained a lot of traction, I have to say. You're absolutely right. It is more about fully household systems. So it's about, you're either selling to homeowners. In the case of flats and apartments, there is certainly community projects there. There's not really anything that's very small that's linked to charging, say, an electric vehicle. Obviously, you do get sort of some systems, see solar panels on everything. They try and put solar panels on the advertising hoardings and all these things, and on freeways. You might get them on the signs, but nothing really that I've seen that's catering for the dedicated charging at a smaller scale.
I'm surprised at that. I mean, it seems something like a small little carport kit, and you have the solar panels on the roof, and you've got a charger built into the side, and it's not a very expensive thing to buy and install.
Yeah,
I'm just surprised.
Yeah, you're obviously getting carports that they're putting solar on, but I'm kind of, my assumption would be that the economics is not quite there yet for the batteries. because generally, obviously, the batteries are cheaper in the larger size. So it's potential that as the residential market grows and the other markets grow, that maybe that becomes more viable. But no, it's not something I've really heard of at all.
This is Ken Wacks. I have a question about the battery technology. Is there likely to be other chemistries that are less expensive than lithium, or technologies that may not use chemistry, perhaps like electronic storage?
At the moment, and lithium spiked a lot late last year, but the price has fallen back quite considerably, actually to near where it was a couple of years before that. So the pressure on lithium prices has eased significantly in the last 3-4 months. Generally, the forecast and the expectation is that lithium will dominate. We do see other chemistries potentially coming into some of the other, like the grid market. You see flow batteries coming in. So you've got the use of nickel. So there's alternative solutions there in some of the other energy storage spaces. But for the residential space, lithium does seem to pretty much have a lock-in on likely demand. It's very much linked to the fact it works in the cars and you can benefit from scaling up with the cars. That seems to be basically what we're seeing. So not really hearing much at all about other chemistries making a significant impact.
Hi, this is David. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm David Katz, Ontario Sustainable Energy Association. So with regard to Canada, we have a massive now greener home program with the federal government paying people to put solar on their roof. And we have ultra low rates at 2.4 cents a kilowatt hour at night to charge your EV. So it could also be charging your Tesla wall. So I'm just letting people know that there are Canadian opportunities that are economic.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. That's
just on that, in terms of the fact that we don't get 100% back from the battery. So, and just on lithium, I have to tell you, I watched 60 Minutes the other night, and it's all about lithium in the US that are going to be massively found. But in terms of the economics, so when you're charging, you don't get 100% back, and then what's the life of these batteries?
Yeah, I mean, the life, in the automotive space, I think they can tend to do around a decade. I think we're looking at something similar in the residential storage space. Obviously, this is going to vary depending on the battery, the frequency of usage, and the charging patterns. But from what I understand as well, the technology obviously has also improved to optimize the charging, a bit like we have with our phones, to try and make the battery life last as long as possible. So they have a pretty good battery life. There's no real need to necessarily swap them out in any immediate time. So you should certainly get a decade out of them. So well, probably they would need to replace when you get, your panels cleaned, and maybe panel replacement happens.
Okay, thank you.
And we
got a couple.
Yeah, I was just going to say we have a couple questions, but I'll give that up to you then, Jonathan.
Yeah, I've sort of seen there, just waiting for a pause to bring them in. Lithium reserves. I think that was maybe the gentleman who just spoke. There is definitely, I would say, there is definitely the potential for more lithium reserves to be found. The countries that I identified are the ones with known proven reserves at the moment. Obviously, because of the demand for lithium, there is going to be a big focus on trying to discover more reserves. So I think we will see that as a constantly evolving situation. So it's not that countries will be totally without reserves, and I'm sure the US will be okay. But for example, for Europe, the odds of us finding significant lithium reserves are going to be lower. Like, we just have less likely opportunities where that's going to be, given our historical material footprint. So for Europe, it's really important that we try and secure those reserves from where we can. But yeah, the US has obviously got a lot more potential there. We've also got a viewpoint question from Bradley Smith. about the latest net metering rules in California. So yes, I'm not an expert deep into this one, but I understand obviously there are proposals going forward that are expected to really slow down the PV market in California. Now, what'll kind of be interesting there is at the moment, residential solar PV still runs ahead of battery energy storage. So you still have a lot of residential PV systems that are being installed, and they're not installed with battery energy storage. So the hope would be that given the electricity prices are still high, there will still be a business case, I think, for battery energy storage to come in. And also there will still, I think, be a factor of some of the people who have residential PV would also want it for grid security reasons. So we do expect residential solar growth in California to slow quite considerably. But there is really, I think there is really still the potential for batteries to gain. And there will be some people as well who are who have solar PV who are now looking to put battery energy storage systems in later on. So retrofitting, as we say. So I think it's a negative for the overall market, but for solar PV, I do think it will slow growth overall, but I do still think there will be some decent level of activity there, but not as good as it would have been before.
Jonathan, Ken Wacks again.
Yep.
There was a presentation just 2 days ago on CBS 60 Minutes about a huge lithium mining operation starting at the Salton Sea just east of San Diego near Palm Springs.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there are incentives to do it. So we will need to have substantial assets, substantial amounts, but you know, the United States is going to need a lot of lithium. It is looking to, if you're going to electrify transport, all the other things that we're aiming to do in the United States, as Europe will as well. So we will need to bring stuff in from elsewhere.
The car maker Stellantis, the maker of Chrysler and Jeep, invested in this lithium find.
Yeah, they're very, the car makers are very keen on trying to secure material supply chain now, both in terms of other aspects of their supply chain activity, but definitely down to materials. That securing material chains has become a more generally from clients that we speak to has become a higher priority, and that is principally because of China. Any more questions?
Jonathan, I think we have, is it Dayan Skoritz? Dayan, you have your hand up, so I was just curious if maybe you might have a question or a comment. And if so, if you could just unmute yourself.
Oh yeah, we have got somebody with their hand up.
Sorry, no, that was a mistake. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Well,
Okay.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. At this point, Marta, I believe we turn to new business.
Yes.
Do we have any new business, new webinar topics, new white paper ideas? We used to have a very active white paper committee developing white papers that were suitable for this audience. They didn't have to be extremely technical, but they introduced new ideas, new business opportunities related to Connected Home Council. So if anyone would like to author a white paper, we will help you by putting together a subcommittee to, if possible, help do the writing, but at least review the paper and help get it in shape for publication by CHC. We also publish papers that are authored outside of CABA. This is through the Publications Review Committee. CABA members are invited to review papers or offer papers to CABA they've seen published elsewhere relevant to CHC or IBC. And most papers are accepted if they're recently published, like within the past year, and they're not overtly commercial. They certainly can mention brand names, but not say that that's the only solution in town. We use our papers to educate the CABA members, so keep that in mind when selecting papers. And by the way, if you find a paper outside of CABA you'd like to have published and you review it, you'll be paid $25 in currency and $25 in credit for CABA purchases. Charles is not here, Marta, to talk about announcements.
No, but Greg will actually take over for that.
Sure, we have some past events. There was Smart Spaces from Parks Associates just recently in Dallas, and some upcoming events is there's a connections event in the Connected Home Summit from Parks Associates as well, and there's a Shanghai Smart Home Technology Expo, and CD is coming up in September. So this is not by no means an exhaustive list. We definitely have a much more detailed list of endorsed and non-endorsed events on our CABA webpage and a calendar. So feel free to visit that if you're looking for any connected home events in coming up in the near future.
And Marta, if you'd like me to mention the international standards meetings going on.
Yes, please, Ken, by all means.
I chair a committee of the ISO and IEC. We're responsible for doing IT-related standards for equipment in homes and buildings. We've written more than 60 international standards intended to help promote international trade and commerce. We've developed standards for device interfaces. These are sensors, actuators, controllers, user interfaces, standards for communication networks, standards for applications ranging from safety, security to lighting control, and quite a bit of work now on energy management, standards for the interface between homes and external networks, including protections for cybersecurity, and standards to promote interoperability among applications and to develop a common user interface. Anyone is welcome to participate. The best way to do it is through your country's national body. The United States, Canada, many European and many Asian countries, some in Africa and India and Australia, all have national bodies which participate. Meetings started today. They'll continue the semi-annual meetings. The spring meeting now is via Zoom. It'll be every day, nearly every day this week and next week for about 3 hours a day via Zoom. Our biggest challenge is finding times, considering we're spanning the globe. Some people are awake, some people are going to sleep, some people would rather be asleep. But I tell them all that's better than dealing with 2 weeks of jet lag. But we will be having face-to-face meetings for our fall meeting in Berlin, Germany. So if anyone would like to participate or information about participating, please contact me. You can get my contact data, email, and telephone at kenwacks.com, KENWACKS.com. At this point, we want to remind you our next meeting will be Tuesday, July 25th. We are ready to adjourn. Are there any last-minute comments by anyone, either on the administrative staff or the participants? If not, thank you very much for your attention. This has been a very fruitful and educational meeting. Thank you.